who really controls your life? What if I told you everything you think you know about our society was a carefully crafted lie? For the past 4 years, I've studied economics, and I've come to an unsettling conclusion. We do not live in a democracy. So in this video, I'm going to expose exactly how your freedom is taken away without you even realizing it. I'm going to explain the unwritten rules that determine how our society actually functions, and I'm going to pull back the curtain and reveal who or what is actually running the show. And whoever you think it is, I promise, it's not them. Here's 3 reasons why you don't live in a democracy. In order to uncover whether we live in a democratic society, we first have to define what we mean by democracy. While democratic societies can take many forms, in its essence, democracy means rule by the people, all the people, not just the ones with the crowns or the guns or the money. And by this definition, our society would appear to be democratic. But as I'm sure you're aware, things aren't always what they seem to be. Let's dig a little deeper. You've probably driven through some parts of America and thought, what happened to this place?
They stripped the aluminum siding off of it for scrap metal.
Entire American cities, in fact, whole areas of the country that just look ugly and blighted. What many people don't realize, though, is that much of this ugliness and decay is on purpose. Let me explain. You might be familiar with how the Steel Belt became the Rust Belt. The upper Midwest used to be full of prosperous cities. They produced America's steel, its coal, its automobiles. But starting in the 50s, most of these manufacturing processes moved overseas, leaving the cities they'd built to rot. The consequences of deindustrialization were predictable and devastating. So we have to ask, why was this allowed to happen? I said earlier that all of this was by design. Of course, when I said that, I didn't mean that the citizenry self-consciously chose it. In fact, we barely even noticed until it was too late. Instead, the decision was made by profit-seeking industrialists looking for cheap labor markets abroad. So why was such a major decision left in the hands of a relatively small group of unelected, self-interested tycoons? Well, unfortunately, the fate of the Rust Belt is just a microcosm of a much wider phenomenon. It's truly eye-opening to realize that the place where adults spend much of our waking lives, the workplace, is totally outside of democratic control. You have no say over how your workplace is run or how profits are invested, and you certainly have no democratic control over the development of the economy at large. So you have to ask yourself, are you okay with such a large sector of a supposedly democratic society being run like a dictatorship? The craziest part about it is you've probably never even considered that these decisions could be better made at the ballot box than in the boardroom. Now, I understand that you might consider this idea of economic democracy to be radical, and I accept that. If you wholeheartedly believe that we as citizens are not entitled to democratic control over our own economy, then suit yourself. But what I think is probably going on is that you've been taught to develop an artificial separation between the political and the economic spheres of society, where different rules apply. In the political realm, citizens get to make choices and decide how the government functions. But in the economic realm, we don't, aside from choosing what to buy and who to sell our labor to. All I'm asking is for you to consciously think about this belief and think about who this belief benefits. Because if you're not a board member of a major company, it's probably not you. So we have to ask ourselves, how did our thoughts get so constrained? Why is it that in a supposedly free society, we seem to fall victim to propaganda? Well, in order to answer this question, we need to talk about thought control. Do you consider yourself smart? Most people do. And like most people, you probably think you're immune to propaganda. That is, you would be, if there was any propaganda. We're surrounded by images. We live in a digital culture, and often we see more of the world through a screen than through our own eyes. But we don't often stop to think about why we're seeing the content we're seeing. Because when we experience life, we're just existing. But in the digital space, that experience is curated. So we have to ask, who controls what we see? And more importantly, who controls the narrative frames that we use to interpret what we see? Well, if you do some research, you'll find that the vast majority of information that you consume and that secondary sources like yours truly rely on comes from just a few massive media conglomerates. And all of them, yes, even the ones you agree with politically, are systemically biased. Here's why. Principle number 1. Let's say you're an enterprising young Fox News anchor. Good place to be. Fair and balanced. You're an enterprising young MSNBC anchor. Let's also say that you just got a scoop about unsafe workplace conditions on the set of Shrek 7. Anyway, obviously you report on this hot gossip, right? Well, maybe not. MSNBC's parent company is Comcast, who also owns Universal Pictures, who owns DreamWorks, who owns Shrek. Now, of course, this is just a silly example. That is, if you don't take Shrek's victims seriously. But this principle applies across the media landscape. Media companies are heavily disincentivized from reporting on anything that could hurt the brand of the companies they're bound up with. So in the case of Shrek 7, MSNBC might buy the rights to the story and then bury it. It's called catch and kill, and it happens all the time. And since media companies are such massive operations that require loads of resources, only a few mega corporations are able to do it at scale. And these mega corporations often have diverse holdings in many different industries, which means media companies have to be very careful about whose toes they're stepping on. So that's principle number 1. Media companies must cater to the interests of their owners, investors, and subsidiaries. Principle number 2. Have you ever wondered how media companies make money? Maybe not. It's a fairly simple answer. They run ads. Again, imagine that you're the enterprising young news anchor and you get another tip on a dangerous side effect of a common household cleaner. The only problem is the company that manufactures that cleaner advertises on your platform. So, do you report on the story? Well, you're welcome to try, but you most likely be fired for violating the number 1 rule of business. Don't mess with the money. So what does this mean? It means that news companies are heavily incentivized to play nice with the insurance industry, the auto industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and whoever else might want to advertise on their platforms. So that's principle number 2. Principle number 3. This is a bit of a curveball question. Where does news actually come from? I mean, there's no news mine where reporters go to excavate stories. No, reporters have to go out into the world to source their stories. So in order to tap into a steady flow of credible information and stay in business, news corporations have to play nice with think tanks, with governments, with corporations. In other words, they have to cozy up to the rich and powerful or risk getting cut off from that sweet, sweet news juice. And since powerful organizations and institutions have a much greater ability to generate flack, news companies naturally steer away from saying anything that could put them on the bad side of the rich and powerful. In order to avoid being branded as terrorists, communist sympathizers, or whatever else, media companies must toe the line drawn by governments, the defense industry, and their corporate owners and advertisers. So that's principle number 3. News companies are beholden to their sources. And these rules go for all media outlets, especially the major corporate outlets where most of your information is likely to originate. Oh, but Harper, I don't watch the news. I get my information from TikTok and Instagram meme pages. Yeah, well, where do you think those content creators source their information from? Santa Claus? The truth is, while the digital revolution has opened up some opportunities for independent journalism, the overall information situation has actually gotten more dire as the years have gone on. However bad you think the control is, it's probably worse. In 1983, 90% of media outlets were controlled by just 50 corporations. Today, that number is just 6. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The corporate press disagree on certain issues, but when it matters, they're in lockstep.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
On paper, we have freedom of speech, but if you can control what people think, there's no reason to control what they can say. Okay, so maybe our media is not as free as we think it is. Maybe we're not as free as we think we are. Maybe we don't have control over a massive segment of our society. But hey, I mean, at least we still get to vote. We still have control over the political part of society, right? Actually, don't answer that. You thirsty? Of course you're thirsty. Let's get a glass of milk. Now, do you want your milk in the red cup or in the blue cup? See what I did there? Pay attention to the choice you're not given. Maybe you want a juice or beer. I don't know who's watching this. I need to pay better attention to my audience analytics. Maybe you weren't thirsty. Maybe you wanted to drink straight out of the jug, but I didn't give you any of those choices. All too often, we're forced to pick between bad and worse representatives of the same system. And that system is considered justified because we chose it, even if both of the choices we're being presented with are rotten. But the point stands, we do get to decide, however constrained that choice may be. But does our choice matter? Does it affect political outcomes? You don't actually have political power. Rarely, if ever, will you get to directly vote on an issue that affects your life. So when you're only able to elect people who will exercise power on your behalf, it kind of matters whether or not they do what you want them to do. So, do our representatives actually represent us? Let's take a closer look. A democratic government is supposed to be of the people, for the people, and by the people. Of course, our system brutally fails that first test. Our representatives are nothing like us, at least demographically. But hey, if our lawmakers represent us politically, maybe it doesn't matter if they don't represent us personally. However, as I think you'll see, that's a big if. Because in order to legislate, candidates must first be elected. And on that front, the data is clear. The politicians with the money get elected, and that money overwhelmingly comes from big business and the rich, not the working people. But the rich aren't paying for candidates, they're paying for policy, and they're getting it. When you examine the voting patterns of lawmakers, you'll find that they're much more likely to deliver for their donors than they are to deliver for their constituents. Again, the data reveals what we all intuitively know. If the rich want it done, it will be. If the poor want it done, they're likely to get empty promises. The sad reality is, what people like you and I see is just a puppet show. One more thing. Notice how that separation between public and private doesn't exist anymore? It exists for civilians like you, but not for big business and not for the 1%. Power is a one-way street. Hopefully these points have showed you that we have a very narrow definition of freedom and democracy in this country. We have the freedom to consume, but not much else. And we have the freedom to vote, but not much else. But the question remains, if America isn't a democracy, then what is it? You probably think you know where I'm going with this. America is an oligarchy where the rich make the decisions. They control the state, the media, and the economy. Well, not quite. The reality of the situation is actually much worse. I would say that in our system, the rich have control, but they don't have power. To illustrate my point, let's do a thought experiment. Let's say you're a miserly capitalist, and one night, as capitalists sometimes do, you get the Ebenezer Scrooge treatment. You're visited by 3 ghosts, and you're scared straight. You vow to stop exploiting your workers, to stop interfering in the political process, and to support independent media. Then, when you wake up the next morning, you find that, to your surprise, every single other corrupt politician and major business leader on the planet has had the same experience. So if this happened, if every single person in power suddenly changed their mind, things would be great. All the problems that I brought up would be solved, right? Well, not exactly. I think things might be nice for a little bit in this scenario, but as time went on, the world would revert to business as usual. Even if you and every single other person that was currently in power stuck to their promises. Now, why am I so sure that good business people or honest politicians won't fix the system? Let me explain. You see, I think that the powerful are just cogs, and they're big, shiny, well-oiled cogs to be sure, but cogs that don't serve their function will be replaced. The question is, replaced by who? If the people who appear to be in control actually aren't, then who is? Is it a powerful family like the Clintons, the Saudis, or the Rothschilds? Or maybe it's a group of people like the Illuminati, the Bilderbergs, or the Freemasons. Actually, it's none of these. This is not a conspiracy video. That's not who I am, and that's not what this channel is about. I promised you at the beginning of the video that no matter who you guessed was in control of our system, you'd be wrong. That's because there is no person or group in control of our system. The system itself is in control, and I'll prove it to you using only basic economics. let me pass on one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever received. Follow the money. This mindset's gonna help you understand the world better in pretty much any situation. It becomes much easier to understand why our system functions like it does. Politicians don't take bribes because they're evil or they hate their country or something. They do it because campaigning is expensive and big business lobbyists have the deepest pockets. Over time, the politicians who are willing to take bribes will crowd out the ones who aren't, simply because they'll have more resources. The same logic applies doubly in the business realm. Corporations don't poison the planet or exploit their employees or get people hooked on opiates out of evil. They do it because it's profitable. There's a reason that 1 in 5 business executives are classified as psychopaths. Because in our system, the one who's willing to do the most to increase profits is the one who wins. Any business person who doesn't chase profit to the maximum will eventually be outcompeted. Any member of the media who doesn't toe the line will face repercussions. And any politician who doesn't seek a corporate sponsor will struggle to find a platform. That's what I mean when I say there's no single person or group of people in charge. In other words, think about the rules of the game we're all playing. Whoever seems to be in charge, no matter how powerful they may be, they're just playing the game, same as you and I. Of course, the rich defend this game and they rather like it because they're winning it, but they don't have much control over its rules. They're in power, but they don't have power. The ruling class is selected by algorithm. I understand this situation might seem dire. So the question is, what can you as an individual person do about all of this? Because once you understand the world for what it is, it can seem like there's this amorphous cloud of issues always hanging above your head just out of reach. But the good news is, we're not speaking about a million isolated problems. We're really only speaking about one. All these issues I've brought up stem from one single source, the algorithm that runs our political and economic system. So what is that algorithm? The ruling class only benefits when people think of this system like the wind, as something universal, unchanging, and natural. In reality, our system is more like a game. It was created by humans, we can analyze its rules, and most critically, if we decide we don't like the rules, we can change them at any time or play a different game entirely. This game is called capitalism, and it has been the dominant force in the Western world for at least the last 300 years. This channel is dedicated to uncovering and explaining that system so that we can all start to move towards a world that works for everyone, not just the rich and powerful. If you've watched this far into the video, you clearly resonate with that mission, so welcome. You're one step closer to the truth. But actually, everything you just learned about the system is useless unless you understand how this system came to be, how it spread itself around the world, and the brutal measures that it will take to maintain its power. So that's why I made a full hour-long video about how this system gained control around the globe. The story spans more than 100 years, and I'll warn you, it's not for the faint of heart. It involves mind control, terror, torture, international espionage, and of course, explosive seashells. This is the other side of the 20th century that no one talks about, and they certainly won't teach you this in school. Click here to watch the full video right now.